I was sitting in the cold, sterile waiting room at the clinic when my phone vibrated in my coat pocket. I almost didn't pick up. The last few months had been full of calls. I didn't want to answer. But when I saw it was my daughter, I felt a flicker of warmth and pressed accept. Her voice on the other end didn't sound like Angela. It was sharp, businesslike. She said, "We're going on a trip to Europe tomorrow. I sold your beach house and your car. We needed the money. Bye." And the line went dead. For a few seconds, the world spun in slow motion. I stared ahead at the dull green wall. Heart pounding. Ears ringing. 45 years. I raised that girl through fevers and first heartbreaks. Through scraped knees and graduation speeches. And now she tossed me aside with less emotion than shed used to return a dress at the mall. I didn't cry. Not right then. I looked around at the other patients. Some coughing. Some sleeping. All waiting for news they didn't want. And I smiled. Because there was something Angela didn't know. Something I had almost forgotten myself. My name is Antonia. I am 71. And 6 months ago, I lost my husband Robert. He passed while we were having breakfast. Just like we always did. Toast. Coffee with cream. A kiss on the forehead. His last words were, "Good morning, my love." I thought Angela had stepped up after that. She visited 3 times a week. Took me to the market. Suggested, I get a full checkup. "You need to take care of yourself now that you're alone," she said with that soft smile. Back then, I thought it was concern. Now I know it was strategy. What she really meant was, I need you alive just long enough to sign things. The beach house wasn't just a building. It was Robert's dream. We bought it when Angela turned 15. We spent every summer there. Christmases, too. I cooked. I cleaned. I watched Angela bring boyfriends and, later, her husband Edward. That house had laughter in its walls. And sea salt in the wood. And the car, that old Ford pickup, Robert treated it like a child. He washed it every Sunday. His scent still lingered in the driver's seat. I didn't lose property today. I lost memories. And still, I didn't cry. Because 3 days before Robert died, he handed me a sealed envelope and said, "Put this in your dresser drawer. Open it when you're ready." The nurse called my name. I stood, stiff-legged, and followed her into the exam room. The doctor said I was healthy for my age. Just needed more rest. More vegetables. I smiled politely and nodded. But my mind was already back home. Back to the manila envelope. Back to Robert's voice in my ear. My daughter thought she had taken everything from me. She thought I was a helpless old woman she could manipulate. But Robert had been a man who always planned 3 steps ahead, and had left me a final move she didn't see coming. I took the bus home. Sat by the window and watched the city roll past. I saw children playing, lovers arguing, people racing through their own quiet disasters. And I thought, no one would guess the storm building inside me. That evening, I went to my bedroom and pulled open the dresser drawer. The envelope was still there. I hadn't touched it since the funeral. My hands trembled slightly as I peeled it open. Inside were multiple documents. Real estate titles, bank statements, a letter. My name was written on the front in Robert's neat handwriting. I sat on the bed. Our bed. And the silence in the room felt sacred. Outside, the sun was starting to dip. Long shadows crept across the floor. I opened the letter first. My dear Antonia, if you are reading this, it means I am gone. Forgive me for keeping secrets. But I needed to protect you. Over the years, I've invested in properties, companies, and accounts. You are rich. My love. Always have been. But now you are on paper too. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. I unfolded the rest of the papers. Property deeds in my name. A condo downtown. A motel by the coast. Even the apartment building where Angela and Edward lived. The company name wasn't familiar. But Robert had made me the sole owner. There were bank accounts I never knew about. Numbers that didn't seem real. My husband, the humble bus driver, had quietly built an empire in my name. And he had trusted me with it. Angela didn't know. Edward didn't know. And now I was the one holding all the cards. But I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to confront. I was going to play this smart. Quietly. Strategically. Like Robert would have wanted. I stayed up that night without sleeping. I wandered the house touching furniture that Angela had once mocked as old-fashioned. I looked at photos of birthdays and summer nights. Of my daughter laughing in Robert's lap. And I whispered to the shadows, where did that little girl go? When did she become someone who saw me as a burden? The phone rang the next morning. It was Angela again. Her voice was lighter this time. Almost fake cheerful. She said, they had deposited my portion of the house and car sale into my account. It wasn't much. But it should last a few months while I found something smaller. My portion. 30%. Of my own house. Of Robert's truck. I thanked her calmly. She told me they were off to Europe that afternoon. Said they loved me. And then hung up again. I stared at the phone and let out a long laugh. A real one. The kind of laugh that bubbles up when absurdity hits its peak. They had taken what they thought was everything. But they had no idea what they had just unleashed. I was no longer grieving. I was no longer weak. I had a plan. And the first move would be to pay a visit to a certain lawyer who had once told me, if you ever need help, call me. Well, Mr. Peterson. It's time. Cliffhanger. I picked up the phone and dialed his number with a steady hand. I didn't wait for courage to arrive. I put on my wine-colored dress. The one, Robert said, made my eyes look alive. And I carried the manila envelope like a fragile lantern through the morning. The city felt different. Edges sharper. Colors brighter. As if someone had turned the focus ring on my life. Mr. Peterson's building had marble floors that clicked under my low heels. And the front desk smelled faintly of lemon polish and old paper. I sat across from him at a walnut table while he skimmed the deeds. The bank certificates. The articles of incorporation with Robert's quiet signature humming beneath every line. His eyebrows rose once. Then again. And finally he exhaled in a slow whistle. He hid behind folded hands. He said the structure was clean. The assets were real. And the company name ID, never heard of, made me sole owner of more than a few front doors and keys. I watched dust float in a sunbeam cutting across his desk and thought of Robert at our kitchen table. Doing numbers on the back of grocery lists. Mr. Peterson explained options like chess moves. Reverse the illegal sale of the beach house. Regain possession of the truck. Transfer active control of the apartment building where Angela lived. Secure accounts against any surprise withdrawals. I noticed a chipped corner on his legal pad and, for reasons I couldn't explain, I felt steadier than I had in months. The law was on my side. But something in me wanted more than a verdict. I wanted a lesson to land where it needed to land. The first twist came when he mentioned a power of attorney Angela had used. He said a signature in my name had granted her wide privileges after Robert passed. and asked if I remembered signing. I did remember a stack of papers on a gray afternoon when casseroles were cooling on the counter and condolence cards were lined like soldiers on the mantel. I remembered Angela moving briskly through pages, saying the bank required this and the insurance needed that, and my pen scratching while my heart dragged behind. Mr. Peterson tapped the page with a capped pen and said the sale of the beach house could be unwound because title never transferred lawfully. The truck, however, I might take more effort, since the document gave her latitude. He watched my face to see if anger would flood it. It didn't. Anger was expensive in energy, and I had a better currency now. I asked him what could be done quietly. He proposed filings, notices, a couple of letters with firm language and soft edges. He would call the buyers to return their funds from a holding account and put the beach house back where it belonged. He would begin the process to seat me as active manager of the company Robert built. I traced the grain of the walnut table with my fingertip and felt a calm resolve settle in. The sort that sits in the spine, not just the mind. I walked out carrying copies in a simple folder and rode the elevator with a delivery man balancing a bouquet of white lilies. Their scent followed me onto the sidewalk like memory. At home. The envelope returned to its drawer, and I returned to the kitchen table where so many plans had been stirred into soups and set to simmer. I made tea and spread the documents out like a map. The beach house deed, with its thin blue border. The list of units in the downtown building. The statement with numbers that looked like someone else's good fortune. I pictured Angela's carry-on bag, the one with the little gold lock, and wondered how long her confidence would last once airports turned into return flights and hotel rooms turned into unanswered calls. I took Robert's old key ring from the ceramic dish by the sink. The truck key was gone. The small brass house key to the beach cottage still rested there, scratched and warm with history. I held it in my palm until the warmth became mine. I thought about calling Angela and telling her everything, but the impulse passed like a wave that breaks before the shore. If Robert saved in silence, I could teach in silence. The stakes were larger than furniture and deeds. They were respect, boundaries, and the difference between love and convenience. My plan would not humiliate. It would clarify. The second twist arrived through the window in the late afternoon, carried by neighborhood news and a breeze that lifted the kitchen curtain. Aurora Wad, known me since our children shared popsicles and summer colds, called to say someone at the bank mentioned Edward's name with the sort of tone people reserve for problem files. She said there were whispers of loans layered on loans, paper built on air, and collateral that might not exist where he claimed it did. I stirred sugar into my tea and watched the granules melt to nothing, thinking how quickly sweetness disappears when heat is applied. If those rumors were true, Angela wasn't just chasing a European adventure. She was running ahead of a tide. I opened a clean notebook and wrote 3 lines in the first page. Restore. Secure. Teach. Restore the house, and what it meant. Secure the assets and the story behind them. Teach my daughter the difference between taking and earning. I didn't know exactly how or when she would return. Only that tide always returns to shore. When it did, I wanted a door that opened, a table that fed, and a mirror that told the truth. I closed the notebook, set Robert's key beside it, and listened to the quiet pulse of a home that had not abandoned me. Not for 1 hour. Not for one breath. Cliffhanger. The next morning, Mr. Peterson called with 5 words that rewrote the timeline. The beach house is back. The morning light hit the kitchen tiles in familiar angles. The kind that used to land on Robert's newspaper as he sipped his first coffee. I sat in his chair, just like I had for 45 years, and held the phone to my ear while Mr. Point by S and without ever aid. Peterson explained the outcome. The buyers of the beach house had been cooperative. They'd been told I was too sick to handle the transaction myself, that the daughter had power of attorney and needed the sale urgently. They believed the story. Of course. Who wouldn't believe a daughter speaking for her widowed mother? But once Mr. Sanjit Peterson showed the legal inconsistencies, they agreed to reverse everything. Their money would be returned. And the house would be mine again by the end of the week. I thanked him softly and hung up. Then I pressed my hand flat on the table and whispered to the empty chair across from me. Step 1 is done. My love. Outside. Birds fluttered along the telephone wire. I moved through the house slowly, touching walls, adjusting framed photos that had shifted slightly with time. One picture stopped me, a snapshot of Angela at age 5. On Robert's lap. Her curls tangled in the breeze. Both of them laughing like life had no sharp corners. I stared at it, waiting for the warmth to come. But it didn't. The child in the picture was gone. In her place now stood a woman who had calculated my usefulness, sold my memories, and hung up with rehearsed affection. Still, I didn't hate her. I pitied what she had become and what it must be taken to get there. Angela hadn't called since that morning she announced the sale. No updates. No questions. No goodbyes. I imagined her boarding a plane, sipping champagne beside Edward, confident that the pieces were in place, that the money would hold them up for a while. But time has a way of shifting under people like sand. I wasn't going to call her. I wasn't going to beg for explanations or apologies. I was going to build something stronger than anger. A plan made of silence, strategy, and the kind of patience that only comes after losing everything you thought was permanent. By afternoon, I had the list Mr. Peterson had sent. 6 properties in my name through the company Robert created, including the 20-story apartment building where Angela lived. I studied every address, every tenant name, every floor plan, like I was cramming for a final exam I didn't know I'd signed up for. I brewed a fresh pot of tea and spread the documents across the dining table. The smell of lemon cleaner and legal ink filled the room. There was a rhythm to it. The way paperwork snapped into piles. The way the pass lined up in rows like obedient soldiers. The second property I focused on was the building Angela lived in. It had been owned by Robert's shell company for years. But now it was officially mine. Mr. Peterson said administrative changes would take a few more weeks. But once completed, I could act with full authority. I ran my fingers along the printout of her address and imagined her unlocking that apartment door. Unaware, she no longer held the key to her future. Not in any real way. I wasn't interested in eviction. Not yet. I wanted her to feel safe first. To believe that her old life still stood under her feet, unshaken. And then I would shift the floorboards slowly. Not out of cruelty, but clarity. She had stripped me of everything familiar and called it a favor. She needed to know what it felt like to stand alone. Not because I wanted her to suffer, but because I wanted her to grow. That evening, I took a walk around the block. The air smelled like cut grass and someone's barbecue. A few neighbors waved. Most avoided eye contact. Pity has a smell to it. It lingers around widows and women thought to be discarded by their own children. Aurora crossed the street, holding a basket of tomatoes from her garden. She asked if it heard from Angela. Said she saw Edward's name on the news ticker about some shady European investment scheme. I thanked her, accepted the tomatoes, and said I was doing fine. She gave me the look people give old women when they don't know whether to feel sorry or impressed. Back inside, I placed the tomatoes on the counter and opened the lowest kitchen drawer, the one that still smelled like rosemary and held Robert's handwritten recipe cards. I pulled out the one for lemon-roasted chicken and set it aside. Tomorrow, I would cook. Not for company. Not for celebration. For remembrance. I wanted the house to smell like it used to. I wanted to feel my strength, not in revenge, but in routine. That night, I sat on the porch with a notebook. I wrote a list of everything Angela had taken. The house. The car. The assumption that I was powerless. And then I wrote another list, everything she didn't know I still held. Property. Legal standing. The truth. I drew a line between the two and stared at the gap in the middle. That was where the lesson would happen. Not through punishment, but experience. She needed to lose more than things. She needed to lose her illusions. I closed the notebook as the stars began to emerge. Robert used to say the stars weren't distant, they were reminders. He believed they watched us, sent us signs. Stayed. Until we noticed. I looked up and whispered into the night. I see you. And I know what to do next. Cliffhanger. The next day. A letter arrived in the mail with Angela's name on it, but she wasn't the one who sent it. It was a pale blue envelope with her name written in unfamiliar cursive. Nestled between a utility bill and a flyer. For discounted prescriptions. I almost tossed it aside, assuming it was junk mail sent by some automated system. But something about the handwriting made me pause. Angela Brooks. It read. But it had been mailed to my house. I turned it over in my hand. And then slit the seal carefully, with the same kitchen knife I used to peel apples for Robert on Sunday mornings. Inside was a formal notice from the local housing authority. Addressed to her, but tied to the address of the apartment building she lived in, the one I now owned. The letter outlined overdue maintenance complaints from tenants. Filed under Edward's name. All unresolved. I stared at the lines of text until they blurred into one truth. Edward hadn't just mismanaged their personal finances. He had neglected everything around him too. It wasn't just lies. It was decay. I tucked the letter into the folder with the other documents. Another breadcrumb in the trail I was collecting. I spent the morning on the phone with Mr. Peterson. He confirmed that legal control of the apartment building was nearly finalized. Just a few more administrative filings. And I'd be able to act freely. We talked about the importance of timing. About subtlety. About power that works best when no one sees it coming. He asked if I still wanted to move forward with my plan. I told him I wasn't just moving forward. I was preparing for her return. And I knew she would return. Europe was never the destination. It was an escape hatch. A stall. A fantasy. I'd raised Angela long enough to know her survival instincts. When the illusion of control slipped through her fingers, when Edward's promises unraveled like cheap yarn, she would come back. Not for love. Not yet. For refuge. That's how this kind of return always begins. In the meantime, I moved through my days with quiet precision. I took the bus to the coast and stood across the street from the beach house. It looked the same. White siding. Blue shutters. Porch swing that creaked with the breeze. The new owners had put out some potted succulents. Their dog barked half-heartedly behind the screen door. I didn't knock. I didn't need to. The house was already coming back to me. And I needed to feel its presence again before I made the next move. I stood there until the sun dipped low enough to burn shadows on the pavement. Until my breath synced with the rhythm of the waves. Then I turned and walked away. My shoes leaving faint imprints in the sand-covered sidewalk. Back home. I polished the silverware. Not for guests. Just for the memory of order. I dusted the window sills. I sorted through a drawer of Angela's old-school crafts. Yellowed with age. Smelling faintly of glue and childhood. I found a lopsided clay mug shed made in the 6th grade. On the bottom, in barely legible paint, it said "Best Mom." I turned it in my hand slowly, feeling the full weight of irony. How far we'd drifted from those simple truths. That night, I had trouble sleeping. I kept thinking about Robert's handwriting. The calm way he used to sign birthday cards. The steady way he wrote checks. I remembered how he always paused before the last word. As if punctuation mattered more when it ended something important. I sat at the kitchen table with a fresh sheet of paper and began drafting a letter. It wasn't to Angela. It was about her. A kind of emotional inventory. A way to keep my heart in check before the moment came. I wrote. She will come home ashamed, but not broken. I cannot fix her pain. Only offer her a mirror. I must let her look into it on her own time. I folded the page and tucked it into Robert's recipe box. Between his meatloaf instructions and his favorite banana bread. The phone rang the next morning. It wasn't Angela. It was Aurora. Her voice was urgent. Lowered. She said her brother-in-law worked at a bank. And there were whispers that Edward had taken out loans against the apartment without any legal ownership. The bank was preparing to investigate. Angela, she said softly, might be caught in the middle of something much bigger than she realized. I thanked her. Then I sat still for a long while, holding the phone like it still carried warmth. Later that afternoon, I called Mr. Sixdatter. Peterson again. I told him I wanted the truck back too. Robert's truck. The one with the worn leather seat and the glove box that stuck in the summer heat. He hesitated. Said it would be harder. The power of attorney Angela used had technically allowed her to sell it. It would take time to prove deception or coercion. I said, time was the one thing I had plenty of. I would wait. I would build. I would prepare. And when Angela returned, when her heels crossed the threshold of this house again, I would let her unpack her sorrow into the same room she had once painted pink. I would make tea, set the table, and offer her not comfort, but consequence. Cliffhanger. 3 days later, the doorbell rang, and I knew exactly who it was. The sound of the doorbell was soft, almost hesitant. Like the finger that pressed, it wasn't sure it had the right to. I didn't rush to answer. I stood in the hallway, my hands smoothing the hem of my blouse, my breath finding its rhythm. I opened the door slowly. And there she was, Angela. My daughter. And the same woman who had once called me from a doctor's office to say she sold everything I loved. But the person standing on my doorstep now looked nothing like that voice on the phone. She had dark circles under her eyes, lips cracked from travel or tears or both. And her posture was smaller. Not from age, but from defeat. She clutched 2 suitcases and a cardboard box. The kind of box people grab when they have to leave quickly. Her expensive coat was wrinkled. Her shoes dusty. She looked at me with a flicker of something unspoken. Shame. Maybe even fear. "Hi, Mom," she said. And her voice cracked at the second word. I stepped aside without a word and let her in. She walked in slowly, like someone entering a chapel they hadn't visited in decades. The house hadn't changed. Not much. She glanced around at the photos on the wall. The same ones she once mocked for being outdated. She placed her luggage near the foot of the stairs and stood awkwardly in the living room, unsure if she should sit. I motioned to the couch. She sank into it like it was the only stable thing she'd found in weeks. "Do you want some tea?" I asked, already heading to the kitchen. "Yes. Please," she replied softly. I made it the way she liked, jasmine. 1 sugar. No milk. When I returned, she was staring at a small photo on the side table. It was one of her and Robert, taken during a summer barbecue at the beach house. Her hair was sun-bleached, and her cheeks round with laughter. She touched the edge of the frame with the tip of her finger, then pulled her hand back as if it burned. "I am sorry for how I left," she said. "I know I didn't treat you well. It's in the past," I replied gently, setting the tea down. "No, it's not." She looked up at me, and her eyes were filled with something heavier than guilt. It was grief. The kind that doesn't go away with apologies. "I treated you like you were in my way. Like you were some old woman with nothing left to offer. And now," her voice cracked again, "now I have no one. Edward's gone. He left with some girl he met in Paris. There was never a business. It was all lies." She leaned back, the cup trembling in her hand. "He used me. Mom. Used me to get the house, the truck, the money. And now the banks are coming after me. I don't even know what I signed. I thought we were building a future. Turns out, I was just a shortcut." There it was. The moment she realized she'd been a pawn, the betrayal that cut her deeper than the one she'd delivered to me. I stayed quiet. Let her speak. Let her spill what she needed to before I said a word. "I know I have no right to ask this," she said, her voice smaller than ever. "But could I stay here? Just for a little while. Until I figure things out." "Of course," I said without hesitation. "This is still your home." She looked at me like I'd just lifted 100 pounds off her chest. "Really? Mom? After everything? You're letting me back in? You're my daughter? Angela. That doesn't change." She began to cry. Not politely. Not with decorum. She cried the way children do when they fall and finally realize it hurts. I sat beside her, placed a hand on her back, and let her release every drop. But inside, I wasn't just comforting her. I was observing, calculating, preparing for the next part of the plan. That afternoon, she took her things up to her old bedroom. I stood at the bottom of the stairs, listening to drawers open and close. The floorboards creaked the same way they always had. I could hear her moving about, repacking parts of herself, trying to make sense of the space she used to belong to. I walked to the kitchen, opened a drawer, and pulled out the thick folder of documents I had kept hidden beneath dish towels. I placed them on the table, spread out in neat rows. Titles, bank statements, proof. And then I tucked them away again before she came back down. When she joined me for dinner, she had changed into an old sweater I hadn't seen in years. Her hair was tied up carelessly, like when she was a teenager. She offered to cook. The meal was clumsy, the flavors off, but I ate every bite. She talked about Paris, about how quickly Edward changed, about how the money disappeared, about how she couldn't even remember when she started lying to herself. I let her speak. Let her carry her guilt in sentences. I nodded. I smiled. I played the role of the poor, betrayed mother, and the one she thought I still was, the one she needed me to be. But this was only the beginning. She had returned to me in pieces. And now, living under my roof, She would begin to put herself back together. Not through comfort, through truth. And I would guide her every step of the way without her ever knowing. Cliffhanger. That night, as I washed the dishes, Angela walked into the kitchen holding an envelope I hadn't seen before, and it had my name on it. Angela stood in the doorway. Barefoot? Her sleeves pushed up like she'd been rummaging through something she didn't expect to find. She held the envelope out to me. Uncertain. Almost guilty. I found this in one of Edward's old boxes, she said. It was tucked under some tax forms. It has your name on it. The handwriting stopped me cold. It was Robert's. The curve of the R. The way he looped the T. In my name it was unmistakable. But this envelope was smaller than the last, the paper crisp. Like it hadn't been handled much. I took it gently. Not sitting. Not speaking. Just feeling the way the weight of it shifted in my hand. Angela hovered. I'm waiting for permission she didn't know how to ask for. May I? She whispered. I nodded. We opened it together at the kitchen table. In silence. Like we were opening a sacred text. Inside was a short letter and a small brass key. The kind that could belong to a locker or a safety deposit box. The letter was dated months before Robert's death. Antonia. It began. If you're reading this after receiving the first envelope, it means Angela is going through a difficult time. This key opens box number 247 at the Central Bank, downtown branch. Inside is something that might help her, but only use it if she's ready. With love. Robert. Angela blinked at the letter. Confused. A safety deposit box. Dad had another one. I never heard about this. I kept my expression blank. Me neither. I lied. Folding the letter neatly. Do you want to go see what's inside? She asked. Almost eager. Almost desperate. Maybe it's something important. Maybe it's something that can help. I gave her a long look. That depends, I said. Are you ready for whatever it is? She nodded too quickly. I could see the gears turning in her mind. Maybe it was money. Or documents that could undo her legal mess. She was still searching for rescue. Still hoping the storm she created could be cleaned up by someone else. All right, I said. Finally. Well, go tomorrow morning. The rest of the evening passed quietly. She went upstairs early. Exhausted in a way that only the soul can measure. I stayed at the table a while longer. Staring at that small brass key. The way it caught the light. Robert had always known how to give just enough truth. Just enough mystery. Just enough trust to see if we'd use it wisely. The next morning, we took the bus downtown. Angela fidgeted the entire ride, clutching her purse like it might fly away. I sat calmly, the key tucked safely in my pocket. When we arrived, the woman at the bank asked for identification and escorted us to a quiet hallway lined with metal doors. She slid open the box and stepped aside. Inside was a velvet pouch, slightly heavy, and another folded letter. Angela opened the pouch and gasped. Jewelry, not just a few trinkets, but a full set necklaces, rings, earrings, bracelets. Some I recognized from Robert's mother. Others I'd never seen before. Each piece sparkled with a kind of unspoken history. She lifted a pearl necklace with trembling fingers. These must be worth a fortune, she whispered. I unfolded the second letter. It was a catalog. Robert had listed each item, its origin, and estimated value. Altogether, it was nearly $200,000. Angela's breath caught. Mom, With this, you could buy the beach house back. You could pay off the debts. We could finally breathe. Her voice cracked on the last word. But I didn't respond. I watched her face. The way it lit up with hope and desperation mashed together. She didn't ask if I wanted to keep the jewelry. She assumed it was already part of the solution. But I asked her a question she hadn't prepared for. Do you think your father left this for you to sell? Or to remember? She froze. I am not sure. But Mom, we need this. If I don't pay something soon, they'll take everything. Even this house might be at risk if they find any legal connection between me and Edward's debts. The irony stung. But I said nothing. This house, the one she was so afraid of losing, belonged to me. Always had. But I let her think otherwise. For now, we took the jewelry home. Angela laid it all out on the kitchen table like an estate sale, grouping it by size, by sparkle, by how much she thought it might fetch. I watched her run the numbers, whispering rough estimates to herself. She wanted to save herself. That much was clear. But she was still doing it with borrowed pieces of other people's legacies. I couldn't blame her, not entirely. She was doing what people do when the ground falls out beneath them. They grasp for anything solid. That night, she made a decision. Mom, I think I can get around $180,000 if I sell most of it. I'll keep the engagement ring and the necklace Grandma gave you. But the rest, I think it's time to let go. Her eyes didn't meet mine when she said it. There was shame in her voice, but also resolve. She was trying to fix the mess. And for the first time, she wasn't just asking me to do it for her. Cliffhanger. As I turned off the kitchen light, I wondered, was she ready for the truth? Or just desperate for relief? The next morning, the kitchen table was covered in velvet boxes, zipped pouches, and slips of paper with phone numbers and pawnshop names scribbled in Angela's handwriting. She had stayed up late, calling local jewelers, making appointments, researching the best places to sell pieces discreetly. Her face was pale, her hair tied back messily, and she looked older than the woman who had walked through my door just a few days ago. I watched her spread out the bracelets like puzzle pieces, grouping the smaller ones into bundles, trying to decide which combinations would fetch the most money. She was careful. Too careful. Weighing sentiment against value in a way that made my chest ache. Every piece she touched had once been touched by Robert, and now she was choosing which memories were worth sacrificing to clean up the wreckage Edward left behind. Do you want me to come with you? I asked gently. She shook her head without looking up. No. Mom, I need to do this on my own. I've leaned on people too much already. I watched her walk out the door with the velvet case tucked under her arm like a weapon. Her shoulders were squared, but I could see the weight in her steps. This wasn't about jewelry anymore. It was about survival and pride. And the desire to feel capable after months of feeling like a fool. She came back 6 hours later. Cheeks flushed, fingers trembling, holding a folded envelope filled with cash. $180,000. She said softly. It's less than what I hoped for, but enough to pay off the worst of it. I made us tea, and we sat in silence for a long while. Finally, I asked, how are you going to decide which debts to pay first? I met with a free financial advisor at the bank. She said, pulling out a wrinkled notepad. She told me to prioritize debts with real collateral loans tied to property or that can trigger immediate legal action. The rest I'll have to negotiate or let sit for now. I nodded, impressed. This wasn't the same Angela who once bought handbags with Robert's pension money or laughed off interest rates as a boring topic. This was a woman who had been burned and was now trying to walk barefoot through the ashes without flinching. But I could still see the pain beneath her logic. She was trying to be strong. Yes. But she was still bracing for the next blow. And there were more blows coming. That night, while she went to shower, my phone rang. Mr. Peterson's voice was calm, measured, but urgent. Mrs. Brooks, we've completed the financial investigation. The situation is worse than I imagined. Edward owes over $200,000 to banks and private lenders. He also used falsified documents with Angela's forged signature. Some of those loans are under her name. She could be held liable. I pressed my hand to my chest and closed my eyes. What are her options? If we can prove she was a victim of fraud and didn't knowingly sign those papers, we can clear her name, but it will be expensive. We'll need a top legal team. I paused. And how much will that cost? At least $50,000. No guarantee of success. Thank you. Mr. Peterson. I'll cover it. But don't tell her. Not yet. He hesitated. You're going to pay it all. I am going to do what I must to protect my daughter. But this has to unfold exactly the right way. Understood. I hung up as Angela returned to the kitchen in fresh clothes and damp hair. She looked at me and smiled faintly. The first smile I'd seen that wasn't forced. Then she sat, ran her fingers over the bills, and said, You know, I never thought it'd be this person. The one who counts money by candlelight. Who sells family heirlooms for pennies. Who calls banks begging for extensions. But maybe I needed this. Why do you say that? I asked. Because I always thought I deserved more money. More comfort. More attention. But I never stopped to think about what I was giving in return. She looked down at her hands. I gave nothing. Mom. I just took. From you. From Dad. From anyone who loved me. And when I ran out of things to take, I ended up here. Her words landed hard. Not for me, but for her. She was finally hearing herself say them. Out loud. And I could tell they hurt. You've learned something many people never do, I said softly. That dignity isn't about what you keep. It's about what you choose to give back once you realize what you've broken. She nodded, tears brimming, but unshed. That night, I sat on my bed with the envelope of legal papers open in my lap and the small brass key still tucked in my pocket. I thought about Robert. About the way he would have held Angela's face in his hands and said, You're stronger than you know. And I realized something. This wasn't just about teaching her a lesson anymore. It was about guiding her through a transformation, one that was already underway. Whether she saw it or not. Cliffhanger. The next morning, Angela came downstairs with a job application in her hand, and it wasn't what I expected. She stepped into the kitchen while I was pouring hot water over tea leaves. Her hair was still damp from the morning shower. And there was a familiar tension in her shoulders, the kind I hadn't seen since her school days, when she was too afraid to show me a bad grade. Angela held out a single sheet of paper, slightly creased and filled out in blue ink. I took it, eyes scanning quickly. It was a job application. Cleaning crew. Night shift. Office buildings on the other side of town. The pay was barely enough to cover groceries, let alone debts. But that wasn't what struck me most. What struck me was her face. Not ashamed. Not bitter. Just grounded. I asked her softly, Are you sure about this? She shrugged. It's all I could find. The bank told me I'll have to show proof of employment if I want to negotiate the rest of Edward's debt. And honestly, "Mom, I think I need this. I need to earn something. Even if it's just minimum wage. Even if it's scrubbing floors." I nodded slowly, setting down the paper. There was something deeply humbling in that decision. This was a woman who had once complained about the thread count in hotel sheets, now preparing to mop floors at midnight. And she wasn't complaining. That evening, before her first shift, I made dinner. Just the two of us. Steamed vegetables and grilled chicken. Nothing fancy. But she ate like she hadn't had a home-cooked meal in months. Maybe she hadn't. When she stood to leave, dressed in a faded gray sweater and old sneakers, she kissed my cheek. "Wish me luck," she said. I did. But more than that, I felt it. I watched from the front window as she walked down the path, holding her bag tight against her side. Her posture was still unsure. But she didn't look back. That was new. At midnight, I couldn't sleep. I sat in Robert's old armchair, the one by the window, thinking about how many nights I had waited up for her in high school, waiting for the door to open, for the sound of her laughter in the hallway, for the clatter of keys tossed carelessly into a bowl. But this night was different. She wasn't out with friends or skipping curfew. She was out working. I didn't expect the tears to come. But they did. Not because I pitied her, but because I was proud. The kind of pride that's so big, it can't find the right words to fit inside it. The next morning, Angela came home just before sunrise. She looked exhausted. Her shoes coated in gray dust. Her hair pulled back in a rushed ponytail. But she had a softness to her face, like someone who had survived something and come out steadier. She sat at the kitchen table and took off her shoes with a sigh. "The ladies I work with, they're kind," she said. "One of them, Mrs. Johnson, gave me tips on how to clean faster without hurting my back. She's 60. I've been doing this for 20 years. Said she started after her husband left her with 3 kids and no money." I poured her a cup of coffee and sat beside her. Angela stared into the steam as if it held some sort of answer. She told me something that stuck. She said, "There are 2 kinds of people who end up doing this work, the ones who never had a choice and the ones who blew every chance they were given." She asked which one I was. "And what did you say?" I told her the truth. That I had every opportunity, every privilege, every blessing, and I threw it all away. I chose wrong. Again and again. She didn't cry. Not this time. There was a steadiness in her voice that hadn't been there before, like she had come to terms with the shape of her mistakes and was no longer afraid to name them. I reached across the table and took her hand. And we sat there, mother and daughter, not in grief, but in quiet rebuilding. Later that day, I called Mr. Peterson. He answered on the first ring. I told him to move forward. Start the legal proceedings to remove Angela's name from Edward's fraudulent debt. Begin the process to restore what could be salvaged. But don't tell her yet. I said, let her walk a little further on her own. She needs to feel what it means to stand, not just be held. He understood. Cliffhanger. That same night, Angela placed her first paycheck on the table and asked if she could pay for the groceries. She came home just after sunset. Her hair still damp with sweat. Her clothes faintly smelling of industrial cleaning solution and metal elevators. She dropped her bag by the door and didn't say much at first. I was sitting at the kitchen table folding laundry when she walked over and laid a thin envelope on the table between us. For groceries, she said. Her voice didn't carry the usual shame or apology. It was something else, an offering. Maybe. Or a boundary. Her first paycheck. Still unopened. Still sealed with its adhesive edge. I looked at it. Then at her. She had changed more in a few weeks than in the 10 years before. "You don't have to do that," I said quietly. "I know," she replied, "but I want to. I need to." I picked up the envelope and felt its weight. Probably less than $100 after taxes. But it held more meaning than any money shed touched in years. I didn't open it. I just slid it back across the table. "Thank you," I said. "But let's keep that for something else. Something just yours." Her mouth opened like she might argue. But then she nodded. A small smile played at the corners of her lips. Later that evening, Aurora stopped by. She'd taken to visiting once or twice a week now, bringing fresh herbs or stories from the neighborhood. That night, she came in with a bag of lemons and a look on her face like she had a secret. We sat in the living room while Angela showered upstairs. "I have to ask you something," she said, sipping her tea. "Did you know Angela was going to come back like this?" I tilted my head. "Like what?" "She's different. Antonia. Softer. Quieter. Not entitled. She listens now. I've seen her at the corner store, helping the cashier bag groceries. She never used to do that." I smiled, but didn't answer directly. Aurora narrowed her eyes and leaned in. "People are starting to talk. They say, you somehow got the beach house back. That Angela paid off her debts. That something changed behind the scenes. Are they right?" I sipped my tea slowly. "Let them talk," I said. "Sometimes stories are more powerful than explanations." Aurora wasn't satisfied with that. "You're hiding something. I can feel it. You're not as poor as you let everyone believe. You have resources. Influence. And you use them, but not in the way most would." "Why?" I stared at the window for a long moment before answering. Because she needed to find herself before she found out what she still had. Aurora placed her teacup down carefully. "That's both brilliant and cruel." "I know," I said. "But sometimes love isn't about rescue. It's about restraint." Angela came downstairs just then, her hair wrapped in a towel, and offered to make us all toast. Aurora excused herself, claiming she had dinner on the stove. As she left, she gave me a look I couldn't quite name. Maybe admiration. Maybe confusion. Maybe both. That night, as Angela sliced bread and spread butter with a cheap plastic knife, she asked me a question I wasn't expecting. "Do you think Dad would be proud of me now?" I looked at her for a long while. At her tired eyes. Her quiet strength. Her newfound humility. "Yes," I said. "Not because of what you've fixed, but because of what you've finally seen." She nodded, blinking hard. "I still have a long way to go." "We all do," I replied. "That's how you know you're growing." Cliffhanger. The next morning, Mr. Peterson called with a single sentence that changed everything. We found Edward. The phone rang just after breakfast. While Angela was still upstairs brushing her hair and humming softly, a rare sound these days. Delicate and real. I recognized Mr. Fart. Peterson's number, before I picked up. His voice was as composed as always, but I could hear the urgency beneath his tone. "We found Edward," he said. "He's in Paris. Just like your daughter suspected. But here's the real news: has been arrested." I stood completely still. The warm mug of tea in my hand, turning suddenly heavy. Arrested. Yes. It seems he tried to obtain residency through a fake marriage. The young woman he was with needed documents. And he needed a way to stay in Europe without being deported. Authorities uncovered the scam last week. But that's not all, he continued. In the process of the investigation, we've obtained new documents. Proof that Edward forged your daughter's signature knowingly, with the intention of escaping the country and leaving her behind with the legal fallout. That means fraud. Coercion. We can now build a solid case that Angela was not responsible for the debts. For a moment, I couldn't speak. Not because I was shocked. Edward's betrayal had never surprised me, but because I realized what this meant. My daughter's name could finally be cleared. Her weight could finally be lifted. Mr. Peterson, I said, please begin the legal process immediately. But do not, under any circumstances, tell Angela. I want her to hear the truth only when the paperwork is done. I don't want to give her false hope. I understand, he said. It should take about 3 weeks. I hung up and stood there in the kitchen, the morning light glancing off the counter. Upstairs, I heard the bathroom door open. Her footsteps light against the wooden floor. I quickly tucked my emotions away before she came down. When she entered, still tying the last knot in her ponytail, she asked casually, "Who was that on the phone?" I glanced at her, smiled, and said, "Just someone looking for the woman who lives 2 houses over. They dialed the wrong number." The lie rolled off my tongue like honey. I was getting used to this now, living in dual layers. On the surface, I was the quiet, aging widow who lived modestly and shared her home. Underneath, I was orchestrating the final stages of her freedom. Not through confrontation, through precision. The next 2 weeks unfolded like chapters of quiet redemption. I watched Angela go to work each evening, return each morning. She helped with chores without being asked. She clipped coupons. She borrowed books from the library instead of ordering new ones. She even began volunteering at a small community pantry down the street. I asked her once why she was doing it. "Because I want to give something back," she said. "I've spent too long taking." One night, she came home with a half-empty tote bag and a story. Mrs. Johnson, the woman Wad helped her during her first week of cleaning, was struggling to pay for her grandson's daycare. Angela had taken it upon herself to help cover the fee, even if it meant sacrificing half her paycheck. I couldn't help but ask, "Why would you do that? You're barely holding things together as it is." She looked at me and replied, "Because someone did that for me. And I want to be that someone for someone else now." Her answer shook me in the best way. For the first time, I saw not just a woman humbled but a woman reborn. A few days later, Mr. Peterson called again. The case was moving faster than expected. Edward had confessed to forging the documents. The court would finalize the ruling soon, clearing Angela's name entirely. All the financial liabilities would be lifted. No more lawsuits. No more debt collectors. No more fear. That evening, I sat with Angela on the porch. The two of us wrapped in worn blankets as the sky turned lavender above our heads. She looked out into the night and said something ill. "Never forget. I used to think being rich meant having enough money to never feel afraid. But now I think it means knowing you can lose everything and still get back up again." Cliffhanger. The next morning, Mr. Peterson called with final confirmation. Angela was legally and financially free. It was still early when the phone rang. The sun had barely broken past the curtain line, and Angela was in the kitchen making scrambled eggs, humming the same little tune she'd picked up from the radio the week before. I answered quickly. quietly, slipping into the hallway with the phone pressed close. Mr. Peterson's voice held the steadiness of good news. "It's done," he said. "The court finalized everything this morning. Angela's name has been cleared. She is no longer legally responsible for any of Edward's debts." I let the words settle over me like a warm quilt. The relief came not with a rush, but with a slow release like air finally let out of a balloon ID held too tightly for weeks. "Thank you," I said. "And now we tell her," he replied. "I'll have the paperwork ready for a meeting." "She deserves to hear it from you," I agreed. The time had come. That afternoon, I asked Angela to come with me to Mr. Blank, the race is in Peterson's office. She hesitated at first. "I don't have money for a lawyer," she said, her eyes scanning her near-empty wallet. I smiled gently and said, "Don't worry about that. Just come." She didn't press me. We took the bus downtown, just as we had weeks earlier when she first opened the safety deposit box. But this time, she sat upright, shoulders squared, not with arrogance, but with earned dignity. Mr. Peterson greeted us with a professional warmth. He handed her a folder thicker than most. Angela opened it slowly, reading through line after line. Her eyes moved quickly at first, then slowed. Her forehead creased. Her lips parted. "These documents say that Edward forged everything, that I am not liable for any of the loans." Her voice trembled. "Is this real?" Mr. Peterson nodded. "It's all real. Your record is clean. You're free, Miss Brooks." She leaned back in the chair, the folder still open in her lap, stunned into silence. "But who? How did this happen?" I looked at Mr. Peterson, who gave me a slight nod. "It's time," I thought. Time to tell her what she needed to know, not just about her debts, but about her mother. "Angela," I said softly, "there's something else I need to show you." I handed her another folder. Inside were property deeds, bank account statements, the full portfolio Robert had quietly built, the apartment building, the beach house, the stocks, the motel by the coast. All of it. She stared at the pages, flipping through them like they were written in another language. This says you own the building I lived in. That you have a trust. That we were never broke. That when I sold the beach house, it wasn't even mine to sell." I nodded slowly. "Yes. And I've spent the last few months working quietly to get it all back. Everything that was taken illegally or otherwise." Angela closed the folder and looked at me, her eyes shining but dry. "Why? Why didn't you tell me? Why did you let me suffer? Why let me work night shifts and sell jewelry and think I was drowning when you could have saved me?" "Because," I said, "you needed to learn something the easy way. Never would have taught you. You needed to lose everything, not just money, but illusions. You needed to see what you took for granted. You needed to find yourself without someone else's wealth to lean on." She shook her head, overwhelmed. I don't even know what to say. I've never felt this much shame in my life. Not even when Edward left. Not even when I hit rock bottom. I placed my hand on hers. That shame, Angela, is not meant to stay. It's meant to teach. Mr. Peterson gave us a moment alone in the office. She looked at me and whispered, "Mom, I don't know if I deserve this kind of forgiveness. You sold your house, your car. You let me move in, like a stray dog. I was cruel to you. And you did all of this behind the scenes while I barely held myself together. I forgave you a long time ago, I said. But more importantly, you've started to forgive yourself. That's what I've been waiting for. Angela exhaled. A sound half laugh, half sob. She hugged me in that small office with its leather chairs and ticking clock. And for the first time, I felt her hold on, not out of desperation, but gratitude. Cliffhanger. That night, back home, Angela made a quiet confession. She didn't want to stop working. The night air was soft, and the porch light buzzed faintly overhead as Angela sat beside me on the steps. Her hands curled around a chipped mug of tea. We hadn't said much since coming home from Mr. C.S. Peterson's office. There was too much to process. Too many truths laid bare. But silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was full of recognition. The kind that sits between two people who have walked through fire and somehow met again on the other side. She looked up at the stars. Then down at the rim of her mug. I've made a decision, she said. Her voice was clear, steady. I don't want to stop working. I waited. Not because I need to anymore, but because I need to finish what I started. I can't go back to being the woman I was. The one who thought everything could be bought or taken care of. That person. She's gone. I looked at her for a long time. In the porch light. She didn't look tired, she looked lit from within. Like someone who had rebuilt their bones from the inside out. Are you sure? I asked. You don't have to punish yourself forever. It's not punishment, she replied. It's purpose. It's proof. I want to know what I am capable of when no one is rescuing me. I nodded, heart swelling, in a way I hadn't felt in years. Angela sipped her tea, then laughed quietly. You know what's funny? Mrs. Johnson, remember her from my cleaning job, asked me yesterday if I was the daughter of that rich lady on the north side of town. I raised an eyebrow. And what did you say? I told her yes. And then she asked me why I was still working. I told her I needed to prove to myself that I could. That I wasn't just someone's daughter anymore. That I could stand on my own feet. What did she say? Angela smiled. She said, well, honey, that's the difference between being rich and acting rich. Your mom taught you how to be truly wealthy. I chuckled, holding back tears. Mrs. Johnson sounds like a wise woman. She is. And she made me realize it's not about the money. It's about how you carry it, how you share it, how you respect it, and how you never let it define you. She turned toward me, eyes bright. Mom, I want to keep living here with you. But not as a daughter who needs to be taken care of. I want to stay here as a grown woman who shares her life with her mother, who pays her share, who contributes, who shows up. My throat tightened, but I smiled. That sounds like a wonderful plan. Angela. And work. Keep doing what I am doing for now. But I've already applied for night classes at the community college. I want to study social work. These past few months have opened my eyes. There are so many women out there like me lost, manipulated, left behind with nothing. I want to help them. I want to use my mistakes for something better. I felt Robert in that moment. Not in the stars. Not in the porch swing, but in her words. He would have been proud. So proud. Angela reached into her bag and pulled out a small stack of brochures. Foundations. Shelters. Volunteer centers. She spread them out like a vision board right there on the porch. What if we turned the beach house into something new? she said softly. A safe space for women like us. A place to land. Not forever. Just long enough to catch their breath. I stared at her. Heart pounding. You're serious. Dead serious. She said. That house has always meant something. Let's make it mean something more. I looked up at the stars. And for the first time in a long time, I spoke to Robert not out of grief, but out of joy. You were right. My love. She just needed time. And this is better than any apology. Cliffhanger. The next day. A letter arrived in Angela's name from prison, and the sender was someone we both thought was gone for good. The envelope was thick. The paper yellowed at the corners. Addressed in handwriting I recognized immediately sharp. Slanted. And just a little too confident. Angela held it in her hands, like it might catch fire. It came from France. From a federal detention center. Edward. Had written from prison. She didn't open it right away. We sat in silence at the kitchen table. The same table where months earlier Shed laid out jewelry for sale, like it was nothing but numbers. I watched her fingers brush. The seal. Her breath coming slow and steady. Then she said. Softly. I don't think I need to read it. I waited. You don't want to know what he said? I asked gently. I think I already know. She replied. Hell, say hes, sorry. That he regrets it all. That he was confused. Or desperate. Or whatever excuse men like him cling to when the walls finally close in. Still. She opened it. She read it silently. Her eyes scanning line after line. Her face didn't change. Not at first. When she reached the end, she folded the letter neatly and placed it back into the envelope. No tears. No outburst. Just clarity. He says he regrets everything, she said. Her voice even. He wants forgiveness. He says he wishes things had gone differently. And do you? I asked. Do you wish things had gone differently? She looked up at me. And her eyes were more certain than I'd ever seen them. No. Because if he hadn't broken everything, I never would have seen what really mattered. I never would have come home. I never would have found myself. And you. I never would have truly seen you. Mom. The letter stayed on the table for the rest of the day. She didn't tear it up. She didn't reply. She simply let it exist. Like a ghost, she no longer needed to run from. Later that evening, we took a walk through the neighborhood. Angela wore a scarf I hadn't seen in years. And I carried a basket of lemons from Aurora's garden. As we passed the small park near the elementary school, she turned to me. Do you remember when I scraped my knee on that sidewalk? You carried me home like I weighed nothing. I smiled. You were 7. And furious that I made you throw away your ice cream cone. You said you hated me. She laughed. And you still kissed my forehead that night, like I was the greatest thing you ever made. You were, I said. You still are. She looped her arm through mine. And we walked in comfortable silence the rest of the way home. Weeks passed. Angela began her night classes in social work. And the beach house project moved forward faster than I expected. She named it Haven, house a temporary refuge for women rebuilding their lives. She took charge of the paperwork. The permits. The budget. She held meetings in our living room with volunteers and caseworkers. I sat in the corner sometimes, pretending to read. Quietly listening to her lead with a voice full of purpose. One afternoon, she came home holding an acceptance letter to a master's program. She'd been offered a scholarship. She stood in the doorway, holding the paper like a trophy. her eyes wide with disbelief. "Mom, they chose me, out of hundreds of applicants." I hugged her. And in that moment, it didn't matter how many mistakes had come before. This was the moment that would define her. Later that week, Aurora visited. She sat in the same chair she always did, sipping tea and shaking her head. "You know," she said, "at first I thought you were punishing her, letting her fall like that when you could have caught her. But now I see you were giving her the one thing no one else ever could. A clean start, on her own terms." I nodded, my eyes drifting to the photo on the mantel. Robert, with his calm smile and steady eyes, he would have understood. That night, Angela and I sat on the porch, watching the sun dip beneath the trees. The air smelled like lilacs and possibility. She turned to me, her voice quiet. "Mom, do you think you'll ever stop missing him?" I thought for a moment. No. But I think I've stopped grieving him, because in every good decision you make now, I feel like he's still part of it. She rested her head on my shoulder. "Thank you for not saving me too soon. I needed to break. And I needed to rebuild. And you let me do both." I kissed her hair and whispered, "That's what love does. It doesn't rescue you from the lesson. It stays nearby until you're ready to rise." The stars came out, one by one, just like Robert said they would. Tiny lights to remind us of the souls watching over us, and I knew then, without doubt, that everything we had lost had only made space for something far more sacred: respect, forgiveness, and the kind of love that doesn't need to be spoken to be understood.